The scream of metal was the first thing that shattered the silence. Then came the power outage. On 6/14, a remote biosynthetic research outpost drifting amidst the fog-drenched oceans of Kareth Prime, systems flickered to black. The night shift engineers had just enough time to blink before the wave hit. It wasn't heat, it wasn't EMP, it was something else. Something living. By the time the emergency sirens failed to activate, 17 personnel were already dead. Their bodies scorched from the inside, collapsed mid-step, mid-code, mid-sentence. The automated doors didn't open. The cameras blinked once, recorded nothing, then went dark. Underground, buried beneath 40 meters of composite alloy and sealed isolation locks, Dr. Elira Kess didn't know any of this yet. Her focus was narrowed to a twitching muscle sample in the isolab chamber, slowly pulsing with bioluminescent threads. In the tank beside her floated the sedated organism, Predathis, a creature unlike anything the Human Federation had catalogued. 8 limbs, a translucent spinal column, a venom gland that didn't kill but rewrote neural responses. Dual-phase neurotoxin, no known antidote, no known pain response. No known fear. Elira adjusted her visor, recalibrated the scanner, and whispered almost to herself, "You're not a predator. You're a mirror." Then the screen went black. She blinked. Once, twice, no signal, no data. The biofeed stopped. Then the lights died, and above her a muted thud. Then another, then many. It wasn't seismic, it wasn't a structural collapse. It was the rhythm of something moving, not walking but hunting. Elira lunged toward the security console, fingers flying through the dark, activating the manual overrides. One of the remaining cameras flickered on. She froze. On the upper deck, shadows crept across the floor. Not shadows, bodies, four-limbed, silver-skinned, bone-thin, the Sharnak. One of the Federation's unsolved threats, silent invaders. Neural hijackers, known to consume both organic and data systems, leaving behind nothing but ash and silence. There was no distress signal, no help, no time. She activated the sub-basement vault, sealed herself into Chamber 9, where the Predathis had been quarantined. As the reinforced doors groaned shut behind her, she heard the unmistakable scraping of Sharnak claws against titanium above. They were looking for survivors. They wouldn't stop until everything was silent. Inside the vault, Elira was surrounded by darkness. No weapons, no suits, just monitors and the tank. The creature inside twitched once, then stopped, its eyes, black and pupil-less, opened. The toxin samples were on the desk, marked lethal in under 30 seconds. Elira didn't hesitate. "You wanted understanding," she whispered, voice trembling. "Then understand me." She grabbed the injector, pressed it to her neck, and pulled the trigger. Pain wasn't the right word. It was detonation. Her veins screamed, her heart stuttered, her vision turned inside out. She collapsed, convulsing, skull slamming into the floor. But she didn't die. Instead, she heard it, not with ears. Not in her language, but inside. "You are not food. You are wound, but wounds can speak." The voice, if it was a voice, was hollow, deep, full of memory that didn't belong to her. Images flooded in, forests long burned, eggs crushed under boots. Screams that echoed through glass tubes. Predathis remembered everything. So did she. When her eyes opened again, her body was still her own. But her heartbeat was slower, colder, stronger. Her pupils had narrowed into twin vertical slits. Her fingertips tingled with residual toxin. She stood. The creature in the tank no longer moved. It had given her its venom. Now she carried it. Outside, the doors trembled. The Sharnak had found her. Elira Kess, once just a biologist with a ruined reputation, no longer felt like prey. The fear was gone. Something older had replaced it. Something primal, something bonded. She stepped toward the central panel, tore off the lockdown seal, and disengaged the vault override. Metal screamed as the entrance opened. And in that silence, when the air itself seemed to hold its breath, Elira whispered, not to them, not to herself, but to something deeper, darker, older, "You want a monster? Then let me show you what one looks like when it learns to survive." The lights flickered, the air shifted, and on the island of 614, the last living hybrid stepped into the warpath. Dr. Elira Kess was not a scientist by title anymore. She had once been the youngest neurotoxin specialist at the Gaia Institute of Advanced Biochemical Research, until they revoked her license, cut her off from every central databank, and labeled her methods a danger to interspecies protocols. Her crime was simple. She had tried to communicate. Not with words, not through translation matrices or algorithmic empathy, but through emotionally induced biochemical transmission, the concept that certain non-humanoid life forms could recognize and respond to feelings encoded directly in hormone and neural patterns. The final straw was her experiment with the seers of Halcyon 3, a species known to devour their offspring. Elira had saturated her own bloodstream with a modified empathy agent and entered the nursery unarmed. The result: she survived, unharmed. The board called it a fluke. The press called it madness. The institute called it inhumane. So she left. She didn't fight the ruling. She didn't appeal. She simply requested isolation clearance for 614, an off-grid biofield island far beyond patrol range, an abandoned ecosystem regulation site where the Federation sent genetically unstable predators and biotoxins too volatile to be stored elsewhere. The perfect place to be forgotten, but Elira didn't come here to vanish. She came to listen. Every creature on 614 had a kill record. Every plant had venom. Every gust of wind carried spores that could melt bone. But one organism stood apart. Predathas, classified S tier by Biohazard Command, nicknamed the Quiet Apex. Over 2 meters tall when fully extended, structured like a spinal column made of glass and light, it had no mouth, no vocal cords, and no visible sensory organs. It emitted no pheromones, left no heat trace, and, according to 10 years of records, had never attacked unless provoked. Elira saw something else, a pattern. It avoided cameras. It circled human encampments at night, but never crossed into light. It once dragged an injured researcher back to camp without being seen. And most important, it never harmed her. For 2 years she tried to study it. Not through sedatives or cages, but with stillness. Observation, presence. She called it he, though she had no way of knowing. She offered him warmth, not commands, open palms instead of weapons. It never came close, but it never left either. Each day she sat outside the electrified barrier, heartbeat slow, breath quiet, waiting, sometimes for hours. One day he blinked. And that was enough. Her team, contracted by the bioweapon division, mocked her. They wanted samples, nerve spines, tissue data. Elira wanted connection. And she remembered the last conversation she had with the Gaia Institute's director before leaving Earth. She had stood in front of the review council, hands trembling but voice steady. Not every form of awareness speaks a language we recognize. The director had scoffed. You're trying to build gods out of monsters, Kess. But she was trying to find out if monsters had memories. And that pursuit, quiet, obsessive, deeply lonely, was what shaped her days on 614. The team barely tolerated her presence. She was given a separate module to work in, far from the main dome. Her access to lab resources was restricted, but she didn't care. She had her own data. She had the journal, a voice recorder sealed in bio-casing, updated nightly with thoughts no one would read. The last entry, made exactly 24 hours before the invasion, was simple. He doesn't fear me. That's rare. I think, if someone ever truly understood him, Predathas wouldn't need to kill. That night she didn't sleep. There had been something in the air. A scent, static, chemical, wrong. She noticed insects crawling the opposite direction. Moths circling the ground instead of the light. Nature always knows before humans do. But she said nothing. They wouldn't have listened anyway. In her dreams she saw him, Predathas, standing under the ash trees, still and silent, watching the stars with eyes that didn't exist. She woke with her fingers curled, as if holding something she couldn't remember grabbing. In the cold morning light, she walked out to the barrier. He wasn't there. For the first time in months, he was gone. Something was wrong, but by the time she realized that, the first scream had already been swallowed by silence. And the war had already begun. It began with silence. Not the usual quiet of 614, which was never truly silent. Even in the deepest hours the island breathed, chittering insects, rustling underbrush. The crackle of bioelectric pulses from the trees. But that morning, there was nothing. Dr. Elira Kess noticed it while on her daily walk through the eastern ridge. Collecting soil pheromone readings. Her boots sank into moss that usually repelled human scent. Today, it was undisturbed. No claw marks, no nesting signs, no trails, and then she saw it, a Wyvex pack, one of the island's apex predator species. Slinking westward, away from its hunting grounds. Behind it followed a troop of deathwings, gliding low and erratic like they'd forgotten how to fly. Predators were abandoning territory. That had never happened before. She tapped into the portable biosensor loop and scrolled through migration heat maps. Every major carnivore, from the acid-backed crawlers to the neural leeches, had shifted east over the last 6 hours, an unexplainable phenomenon. Elira frowned. This wasn't natural. When she returned to the outpost, she connected to the main console in the shared operations room. 4 scientists were already inside, casually arguing over mineral deposits and atmospheric shifts. "Run the geobiosonar sweep," she said, not asking. A few grumbled. Dr. Hand, the xenobotanist, raised a brow. "Expecting a landslide. No, I'm expecting a reason all our predators are running." The scan came up 37 seconds later. Unusual neural resonance detected. Pulse frequency 0405 Hz. Amplitude spike exponential. Source origin, quadrant E7, classified as biologically dead. A cold ripple ran through Elira's spine. "That's impossible," said Dr. Cairn, the systems engineer. "There's no fauna there. No flora either. And yet something's broadcasting," Elira replied. "What if it's just interference?" Han offered. "Solar inversion, a magnetic anomaly, maybe a crustal shift." Cairn nodded. Faultline trauma can produce phantom frequencies. Elira stared at the map. Red lines pulsed slowly as if something alive was breathing under the crust. "You're all missing the point." Her voice was sharp. "We've trained for hostile anomalies. What we're seeing isn't natural migration. It's fear. Every predator on this island is retreating." "That is not coincidence." Cairn rolled his eyes. "We're scientists, Kess. Not jungle shamans. You're acting like ecosystems can think." "I'm saying they can react." Her voice was tight. "And when this many species choose to move the same direction, something has changed." Hand folded his arms. "You want us to believe a forest is feeling afraid. I want you to respect that maybe we're not the only ones who sense danger." A long pause, then laughter. The meeting broke apart soon after. No one backed her suggestion to increase threat-level protocols. No one initiated lockdown. No one listened. That night, the sky turned an unusual shade of ashen green, a hue that didn't match any of the registered atmospheric patterns. Wind currents stuttered. Trees twisted unnaturally, bending away from the east, as if repulsed by something just beyond the tree line. Elira sat alone in her module, reviewing old audio logs from her field recorders. She filtered out wind, seismic shift, thermal resonance. Only one anomalous sound remained, a whisper, low. Warped but undeniably human-like, she adjusted the filters. Reversed the frequency. The whisper deepened. It wasn't a voice. It was a pattern, a breath, a sequence, something trying to mimic language. And it came from the Predatha's nest. She locked the door and boosted signal strength. Within minutes, a second sound emerged, this one closer. It was as if something inside the organism's lair had awakened and was trying to speak. Elira leaned in, eyes locked to the waveform. Her hands trembled. Then the power grid flickered, the lights dimmed, her screen glitched. For a fraction of a second, she saw it, a figure, standing behind the biometric mist of the Predatha's den. Not quite the creature she knew, but something new. Taller, clearer, watching, and then it was gone. She sat back, pulse racing. She didn't sleep that night, not because of fear, but because of certainty. Whatever was coming was already here. It began at 03:14 Standard Time. The outpost lights died first, not a flicker, not a surge. Just a dead, sudden void. 3 seconds later, the security grid collapsed. The magnetic locks failed. Doors slid open with soft hisses, welcoming something that didn't belong. In the control tower, Dr. Cairn barely had time to lift his head. He didn't scream, because by the time his mind registered what he was seeing, it had already been punctured. A limb, long, segmented, almost insected, snapped through the reinforced glass of the monitoring station. The air filled with wet gasps and cracking bone. The thing pulled him upward. His torso hit the ceiling. The rest followed, folding wrong. Then came the gurgling, then silence. The Sharnak didn't announce themselves. They didn't need to. These were not conquerors. They were eradicators. Coded with stealth, designed to overwhelm, no alarms rang. The system was already theirs. The comm screen blinked once, static hissing. Then it displayed one word, not in Federation Common but in bioneural code, observe. By the time Elira Kess heard the first scream from the biology lab, she was already moving. Not to help, not because of cowardice, but because something in her knew this wasn't a standard breach. This was annihilation. Boots pounding down the corridor, she bypassed the western sector entirely. Blood smeared the walls. Doors remained jammed open, flickering red lights casting grotesque shadows over the dead. Hand's body lay in a corner. His throat wasn't cut. It was peeled open. The door to the toxin vault responded to her biometrics with a faint sigh. She slid in and sealed it behind her. The room fell into shadow. Predatha's sample tank glowed faintly in the corner, its biomatter dormant, flickering like a heartbeat. For a moment she did nothing, just breathed, each exhale slower than the last. She sat on the cold floor, back against the wall, hands trembling not from fear but from decision. "You didn't choose to be prey," she whispered to the dark. "And I didn't choose to be a martyr, but I'll be damned if I die here without knowing what you are." Her gaze fell to the injection module. Inside, a thin silver vial. Nerve sealed, marked in 12 languages with the word lethal. Predatha's neurotoxin. She had synthesized it herself. Tested its properties on every simulation. In every case, it killed within 30 seconds. Unless the host accepted it, not physically. Psychologically, it wasn't venom in the traditional sense. It was an invitation, a rewriting, a transmission. Elira lifted the injector. Her thumb hesitated only once. Not a monster, not a god, just something no one dared to hear. The needle slid into her neck, a hiss, then fire. It was worse than she imagined. Her chest clenched, spine arching violently as her limbs convulsed. Her eyes rolled back, and the floor slammed into her skull. For a moment she forgot what a body was, but then images. Not memories, not dreams, Predathes's mind. She saw fire falling from sky vessels. A jungle screaming in agony, eggs crushed under black boots. The taste of grief, if grief could taste like copper and ash. Then silence, endless exile, a mind left screaming into the void for something, anyone to understand. Elira gasped, her lungs opened. Her heart, once chaotic, stabilized. She sat up, the tank beside her glowed brighter, the lights recognized her. Her hands shook, but not from weakness, from something deeper. Her skin felt electrified. Her heartbeat synced with something she couldn't see. She stood and looked at her reflection in the steel wall. Her eyes were no longer fully human, vertical pupils. Veins faintly lit beneath translucent skin, not infected. Not poison, integrated. Above her the thuds resumed. The Sharnak had found the vault. She reached for the door, paused, and whispered to herself, to them, to the echo of every voice that had called Predathes a beast. If you call him a monster, then let me be your nightmare. The door unsealed. The first Sharnak lunged. She didn't scream. She didn't flinch. She moved too fast, not running. Not panicked, predatory. Her fingers sank into its throat. Its neural sac exploded with a pulse of toxin transferred through touch. The creature writhed, choked, collapsed, shuddering. The others paused, hesitated, calculated. That was their mistake. She tore into them, not with claws, not with weapons, but with something more precise, purpose. Every movement was mirrored from the being inside her. Every strike was knowledge borrowed from an ancient species that had survived countless purges. Blood stained her coat, alien ichor filled her mouth. And when the last of them hit the floor, she didn't look back. She stared up at the security camera, still recording. Still observing. She leaned close and whispered, voice steady, I am no longer part of your experiment. I am the outcome you never considered. The air tasted different now. Thicker, heavier, laced with metallic tension and something older than fear, recognition. Dr. Elira Kess no longer moved like a human. Her steps were deliberate but fluid, synchronized with a rhythm that did not belong to her species. She didn't think in straight lines anymore. She did process. She felt in pulses, in textures, in echoes. The hybridization wasn't just chemical. It wasn't even biological. It was existential. Predathes wasn't a parasite inside her. It wasn't a voice whispering commands. It was simply present, breathing through her breath, remembering through her muscles, grieving through her bones. Elira didn't speak to it. She didn't need to, and yet she understood it more than any language could ever permit. Pain, loneliness, centuries of failed contact. It had watched generations of humans land, trap, dissect, classify, and never once try to feel what it was. Until her, in return it shared everything, not knowledge. Not weapons, but instincts, the feel of soil under claw, the pull of starlight against translucent flesh, and the memory, burned and replayed endlessly, of a world set aflame. That night, Elira stood inside the central data core chamber. Around her were 10 Sharnak soldiers. Their movements were cold, systematic, neither hesitant nor aggressive, just efficient. They hadn't attacked yet. They didn't need to. In the center of the chamber, suspended in a stasis field, floated a second Predathes, smaller, dormant, a juvenile. That was the revelation. The Sharnak hadn't come to destroy the station. They'd come to extract the last viable member of the species. Elira felt a cold shiver that didn't belong to her spine. They weren't invaders, they were harvesters, and Predathes was the seed. Not to be studied, but to be cloned, corrupted, weaponized. She reached out, resting a palm on the stasis field's outer shell. She could feel it, the hum of neural stasis, the deep biological sleep of the youngling. and she felt it crying, not in sound, but in the way energy stuttered at the edges. Behind her, one of the Sharnak turned its head, cocked slightly. It had noticed the change in her posture. They didn't recognize her as one of them. Not anymore, but they also didn't recognize her as human. She was unfiled, undefined, dangerous. Her heartbeat synced with the younglings. Predathas inside her responded, and something ancient unlocked. A deep coiled gene, dormant in both the creature and her hybridized cells, awakened. Her fingertips began to glow, not visibly, biochemically. She closed her eyes. You think you've caged a species, she thought, not to herself, but to the invaders. But you've bottled a memory, and memories fight harder than flesh. The first Sharnak lunged. She didn't hesitate. Time slowed, not literally but perceptually, her perception. Expanded by the symbiosis. She spun, ducked under the blade, and drove her palm into the creature's neural cluster. A pulse of toxin, hers and not hers, ripped through its system. It collapsed in violent spasms. The others responded instantly. They didn't scream, they advanced. 10 became 9. 9 became 6, then 4. She bled, but not like a human. Her blood was thinner now, luminous at the edges. The more they attacked, the more her body responded. As if guided by the evolutionary memory of something that had survived extinction before. She wasn't winning through strength. She was remembering how to survive. And they were facing something that wasn't just a threat. It was a species protecting its last child. When the final Sharnak fell, twitching on the stasis pad, Elira collapsed beside it, breath heaving. Her body was breaking under the strain, but her will was intact. She looked at the small Predathas within the chamber. It pulsed once, slowly, then again, and in that fragile heartbeat Elira felt it hope. A dangerous hope. She could run, she could leave now. The Outpost's last emergency pod was still functional. Her body might survive long enough to reach orbit, to broadcast a warning. But that wasn't the question anymore. The question was, who would protect this memory when she was gone? The Federation would see it as data. The Sharnak saw it as a weapon. Only she had felt it as a being trying to be known. And in that decision, exhausted, wounded, half human, half memory, she chose not to leave. She walked to the core terminal, overrode the evacuation protocol. Set the auto-destruct countdown to silent mode, 15 minutes. No sirens, no alerts, just a quiet death. Then she placed her hand on the chamber again. I don't know what I've become, she whispered aloud. But if no one else will protect the memory of what you were, then let me be the last who remembers your name. The youngling stirred, not awake, not yet, but no longer alone. And in the dark, surrounded by the bodies of her enemies, Elira Kess, no longer fully human, waited. Not for rescue, but for a future that wouldn't repeat the past. There was no explosion, no blinding light, no cinematic destruction. When 614 fell, it did so in silence, like a temple burying its secrets beneath ash and ocean. The failsafe was simple. Elira had written it herself when she first arrived. A bioreactive cascade that unraveled the molecular lattice of the entire outpost. Everything fused, dissolved, returned to its elemental core. No samples, no records, no survivors except her. She didn't watch it collapse. She turned away long before the cliffs caved in and the sea swallowed the bones. By then she was already walking into the southern forests of Talon, the forbidden continent, uncharted, uncolonized, and untouched since the planetary biosphere had been sealed off a century ago. No Federation drones flew there. No settlers crossed the river delta. Even the predators kept to the edges, but she entered freely. Because something inside her no longer belonged to the outside world. Predathas was gone, its original body dissolved with the station. But its essence, its memory, instincts, fragments of something far older than logic, remained within her. Not as a parasite, not as a ghost, but as a companion. They shared space, they shared silence, and sometimes, when she stood beneath the violet canopy of Talon's towering blood-vein trees, she could feel the youngling, somewhere deeper in the forest, pulsing softly, alive. She never tried to find it, not because she didn't care, but because it no longer needed to be found. It needed to grow beyond memory. 3 weeks after 614 disappeared from Federation tracking, a single transmission flickered through a fractured comm relay. A corrupted file, less than 30 seconds long, broadcast from an origin point already erased. The voice was unmistakable, calm, unapologetic, human, and not. To anyone listening, I'm not asking to be rescued. I destroyed the outpost. It couldn't be allowed to stand. The species you sought to study is not a weapon, not a myth. Not yours. You called it Predathis, but it never needed a name. What it needed was a witness. A long pause, then, I don't want recognition. I don't need absolution. I just want the world to understand. Not every living thing was born to be feared. The file ended there. The Federation scrubbed it from official logs. Gaia Institute marked her as presumed dead. No search was launched. But rumors grew. On Talon's southern ridgeline, where the rivers coil like veins across the obsidian cliffs, locals spoke of a figure, sometimes glimpsed between trees, sometimes reflected in still water, tall, hooded, still. Eyes like burnished gold, slit-pupilled and watchful. Not threatening, but not quite human. They said the animals there behaved strangely. Predators avoided one clearing entirely. Flowers bloomed in patterns no botanist could explain. And once, a scout drone dared to fly over that region. It recorded only one thing before its core overheated and crashed: a silhouette. Kneeling by a stream, face turned upward, eyes closed, as if listening to a voice the machine could not hear. And behind that figure, for a moment, something moved. Not with footsteps, not with breath, just presence. The image was fuzzy, but the engineers who viewed the footage never forgot what they saw: a child-shaped creature. Luminous and translucent, standing beside her, not touching. Just being, and they never sent another drone again. Elira never returned to human settlements. She shed names. She shed time. What she kept was memory. What she guarded was a story too delicate to archive. She spoke to no one, but sometimes she sang, low tones. Rooted not in melody, but emotion, the only language she and Predathis had ever truly shared. And sometimes, when the wind passed through that forgotten corner of Talon, it carried a feeling with it. Not words, not warnings. Just a question. If you looked deep enough into those eyes, not quite human, not quite alien, what would you see? Not a monster. Not a weapon, just something asking, have you come to understand me, or will you try to kill me again, in the end? This was never a story about victory. There were no parades. No medals. No headlines. No declarations of species superiority or triumphant human dominance. Because what survived on 614 was not humanity's will to conquer, but one human's choice to listen. Dr. Elira Kess did not defeat an enemy. She did not win a war. She unlearned something deeper: the instinct to control what cannot be understood. The Federation will never record her as a hero. Her name does not appear in the official archives of Talon. She left behind no tomb, no autobiography, no final speech. But in the soft edges of the southern forest, in the way the silence carries like breath, she is remembered, not as a scientist, but as a soul who chose to see beyond fear. Predathis was never a monster. It was a mirror, a sentient memory. A survivor of genocide. A creature taught by pain that language meant cages and curiosity meant vivisection. Its mistake was not violence. It was existence without compliance. And for that it was hunted, cornered, misunderstood. Just like her. But Elira did something her species had stopped doing a long time ago. She didn't reach for the trigger, she reached for meaning. And in doing so, she unlocked what no research grant, no weaponized AI, no high command could achieve. A bridge where no words could be spoken, but understanding could still pass. The battle on 614 wasn't a war between humans and aliens. It was a war between instinct and choice, between fear and empathy. She didn't survive because she was the strongest. She survived because she was the first to see that not every survival requires killing. Predathis did not infect her. It didn't use her as a host. It simply offered its truth, and she didn't turn away. That truth wasn't beautiful. It was painful, fragmented, soaked in the trauma of extermination and captivity. But it was also honest, and that honesty became the tether that saved them both. Not by escaping death, but by refusing to perpetuate it. In choosing to carry memory instead of revenge, Elira redefined what it meant to be sentient. Not the capacity to speak, not the capacity to build, but the capacity to honor what has been hurt without hurting it again. To the outside world she vanished, but to the forest, to the youngling now pulsing with quiet life deep beneath Talon's roots, she became the first storyteller in a species that had never known stories. Her message, it was not in any textbook, not in any lecture hall. But if someone ever found the lost transmission she sent, fractured, glitched, but real, they would hear a voice. Steady and strange, say, if you are still human, do not ask how many creatures your technology can kill. Ask yourself instead, can you place your hand upon a being that fears you and choose not to be the first to strike? Because survival isn't forged by weapons. It isn't measured in kill counts or tactical victories. It is found in the pause, in the single breath between threat and reaction, where you choose not to repeat the patterns your species taught you. Predathis taught her that, not through words, but through memory. And she passed it on, not through speeches, but by becoming the silence that never threatened to break first. She never needed the world to remember her, but if the world remembers anything, let it remember this. What saved them wasn't strength, it was restraint. Not the hand that clenched, but the hand that opened. Not the eye that targeted, but the one that blinked first. And if one day, on a forgotten planet, you walk into a forest too still, too quiet, and feel something watching you, don't run. Just stop, breathe, and ask yourself, would I kill what I don't understand, or would I dare to let it live? Even if it never says thank you. Because the real victory, the only one that mattered, was not surviving as a human. It was surviving humanity itself.